Greetings, students. I'm so excited to have two friends from Ithaca here, not from the city, but from Ithaca here, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And you may know Ithaca as the group that is behind JSTOR and Art Store, which you might have met either at the university or perhaps at your high school. I bumped into Amy Gay at ALA this year, at which point I got this wonderful JSTOR goblet. Can't see it because of the background. And Amy has recently introduced me to Nathan Kelber. And he is going to show you some examples of a new product that Ithaca is working on that is still in beta, I think. Not sure. They'll help me with this. Amy, why don't you get started and tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Joyce. My name's Amy Gay. I actually had a little bit of a different journey. I was originally planning to be a teacher, so I started off in an English education program and was always torn between if I wanted to be a librarian or a teacher. And then I was teaching in a community college actually, and my students had never stepped foot in a library before. So we went into the library, and working with the librarian made me realize I chose the path I shouldn't have and decided to go back for my MLIS at Syracuse, where I focused on archives, special collections, and museums mostly, and thought that's where I would end up. But I ended up in the National Digital Stewardship Residency Fellowship and was down at the Food and Drug Administration in the DC area for a year and a half working on a science data catalog. So it was a whole new world for me going from humanities to seeing more of the STEM side of people's data and helping them be able to share that more publicly, which then led me back to my home area of Binghamton, New York, where I was their first digital scholarship librarian at Binghamton University. And seeing that program grow was really nice. And if you haven't heard of digital scholarship before, you wear many hats in digital scholarship, as Nathan will share as well. We help people do everything from creating podcasts and learning what data is and how to gather text data, numerical data, show them how to analyze and visualize that data, but also helping people who are interested in mapping and just be able to tell stories with the information that they find, particularly in humanities. Digital humanities and grad students were the biggest part of my career experience. And now I'm at Ithaca, where I get to work very closely with Nathan, which is awesome. I feel like it's full circle. Nathan and I went to Digital Humanities Research Institute together at CUNY Graduate Center back in 2018. So it's nice to get to work with a formal DHRI colleague as well. But here I am a digital humanities specialist. So I help people at Ithaca and JSTOR learn how to communicate about our different services to the digital humanities community. That can include faculty, students, librarians, and I work very closely with our Constellate team, who has our text and data analysis tool. And Nathan, who is our one of our Constellate educators, I will pass it to him to introduce himself.
Nathan?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I think we have fairly similar history. I also made the wrong choice in terms of which degree to get, but it's been a wonderful journey kind of going through these different steps. I was actually studying English, and so I got my original certification in teaching middle school and high school English and mathematics. And then I went on to study English for my master's and eventually even my PhD. When I was working on my PhD, I was working as a public historian in the city of Detroit. And so I was basically doing public history, preserving digital documents. So basically converting materials from, let's say, magnetic tape media, so VHS tapes and pneumatic tapes, and old school media from the 70s and 80s, and trying to figure out how to get it inside of a computer so that people could actually watch these old videos. Another thing that we did when I was at the Historical Society was a major oral history project where we were going into the community 50 years after the uprising in 1967 in Detroit and getting people's stories about that event. that project ended up winning an IMLS gold medal, which is one of the highest awards you can get in the library world. And so when I finished my PhD in English, I kind of looked at the professor jobs that were out there, and I realized I'd rather be working in a library. I'd rather be a librarian. And so I was very blessed and that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill brought me in as their digital scholarship specialist. And then, much like Amy, I was helping people do digital scholarship projects and creating kind of partnerships between UNC and other local institutions. North Carolina State University and the National Humanities Center. And basically, a lot of my career has involved community building. And I don't think that's any different with Constellate, which is this new project from Ithaca. And so it was difficult for me to leave UNC. It's such a beautiful campus and a wonderful place to work. But leaving UNC, I kind of reached the limit of the community building I could do there. We created a digital humanities collaborative of North Carolina. And then I was like, well, how do I get even bigger than this? And it turned out the way to do that was to go to Ithaca. And so with Ithaca, we're building an international community that is truly on a world scale with Constellate. And so um, Constellate is really a platform to help people learn text analysis, learn and teach text analysis, and also do research with it. And wrapped up inside of that is also, of course, the latest advancements in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, et cetera. But um, I have a winding path to kind of getting to this place where I get to teach for a nonprofit, which is a wonderful way to teach. I get to help people learn all the time. And I don't have to grade papers is the nicest part of this gig. I'd like to show you a little bit of Constellate and kind of what it is exactly, because it's a little bit confusing from an outsider's perspective, because we want to think of things from Ithaca as like resources, like databases and things like that. But Constellate is really a combination of several things. It's a combination of community on one hand. So like I said, we have events that bring in people literally from all around the world. It's not just an American thing. It's not just a European thing. We're worldwide in scale. So we have a community with our own kind of Slack channel and communications where people can come to us. We run an international institute, which this past year had over 1,300 people registered at it and over 400 unique institutions from around the world were represented at this institute. So there's a community aspect to it where we have a community of practice where we learn from each other and teach each other and help kind of keep up with the latest things in AI and ML, which are changing. It feels like on a weekly basis, honestly. It's going very, very quickly. Um, so there's the community aspect, but then there's also an infrastructure aspect. And so in learning these kind of things, it's important to have an environment where you can do that work. And we actually have several environments inside of Constellate where you can do this work. So first of all, there's a no-code environment, which is very accessible for newcomers. And so it allows you to begin learning some of the key concepts in text analysis, playing around with things, clicking buttons, pasting text in and out. You can begin to learn a little bit about what text analysis is and some of the things that it's capable of. So that's one environment. We also have a couple different environments designed for working with code. And so we have an environment that is focused on using a programming language called Python. And we have another environment that's focused on a programming language called R. And these are the two primary languages for doing text analysis stuff. And so you can do a fair amount of stuff just by using point and click interfaces. But at a certain point, it really helps to know these code skills. And these are skills that are useful, not just in the text analysis world, but all across not just academia, but also in the commercial world as well. And so some people, when they hear like, oh, I'm going to learn to program, I'm going to learn a coding language, that's a little bit intimidating. but these are skills that go well beyond computer science, and they can help you in really any career path that's dealing with information and data and so on, and particularly in working in information sciences, being able to manipulate information, whether it's in tabular data form like an Excel spreadsheet, or being able to manipulate it in unstructured data, so like texts, books, and text from the internet. Anything that is really machine readable is something that's tractable with these kind of tools. So um, there's a community aspect to Constellate. There's an infrastructure aspect to Constellate as well. And then there's, of course, like I said, a learning aspect and a community events aspect. So we offer all kinds of classes. And this is one of the main things we do is we offer a ton of programming so you can learn this stuff. It's not always easy for students to figure out where to learn these things. Even if you're at a big institution, that doesn't always mean that there are people teaching these things, particularly in your area. And a lot of these things are very late breaking. They're very much cutting edge. Like I said, the field is changing every week. So part of what we do is we train not only students, but we also train faculty and librarians and other kinds of staff at institutions to learn these skills. Because you have to keep learning even when you get out of college. That learning never ends as your career advances and you go on. So, like I said, classes and a large variety of different things. Some that are aimed at beginners, some that are aimed at advanced users and intermediate and everywhere in between. We have all different types of topics. We have other kinds of events. So sometimes we have panels where people discuss things. So we just had a panel of legal experts actually that were discussing the major court case between OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, and the New York Times, who are duking it out in the federal courts right now about copyright law and how these models are created and what the new laws should say about these things. Because in the US, at least, we don't have a lot of laws on the books. Europe is a little bit ahead of us
Yeah.
in this regard. But I think because a lot of this stuff is coming from America, the federal government is trying to figure out how much to intervene and kind of slow down progress and how much to step back and let these and let artificial intelligence technologies grow. And so I think a big part of that is making a distinction between what's happening in the big tech companies on one hand, and also what's happening on the research side. So in the media, we hear a lot about Google and OpenAI and ChatGPT and the kind of familiar big tech players, but there are actually hundreds of thousands of different models out there, and there are all kinds of researchers in areas all across the university that are working in these areas. They're making huge advances in areas like medical field and other places. So I think so far, what they've been kind of discovering is they should let the researchers do their research, but they may have to take a closer look at what some of the big tech companies are doing, because they're obviously profit driven, and
Yeah.
so they're going to push the boundaries. Um,
Just one more thing before I know we're going to get into a demo in a minute or an introduction,
yep.
but it's possible that my students are not seeing strategies like the ones you're going to show us in their internships or the schools in which they're working part-time at this point. This is this an opportunity for them to introduce some new strategies?
Yeah, it's not only possible, I think it's likely. A lot of this stuff is, like I said, cutting edge. And so one of the challenges, I think, is keeping up with what's happening in these spaces as these things develop, and also just having an idea of what the possibilities are, because those possibilities are changing on a year by year basis. And so, even just 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, some things were not possible that are possible today. I'll give you an example of that. I recently went to Japan for the first time, and my Japanese is not great, let's put it that way. And so what I was just blown away by is the fact that I could pick up my phone and in an augmented reality fashion, not taking a picture, like literally picking up my phone and looking through my phone and seeing what's in the camera, it was able to see the Japanese text and then immediately change it into English text so that I could read it at the pharmacy when my daughter was sick. So I'm just blown away by the fact that we have almost real-time language translation happening now. This is not technology that existed 10 years ago, and it's advancing quite quickly. And so this is changing all sorts of things in areas, not just language translation, but all sorts of things that have historically been difficult to do with language and with text are changing on a year by year basis. And so obviously ChatGPT is one of the most recent examples of this, where we have computers that can write text that looks like it was written by a human to the point where it can be pretty difficult to tell and that has upset a lot of people in the university in the composition and rhetoric world because they're seeing that this stuff is getting pretty good. Is it as good as an expert human writer? No, I don't think so. But it is getting very good, and it may be as good as a freshman composition student. And so I suspect that's only going to increase and this generative AI technology that can write human sounding text is advancing quite quickly. And so there's a lot of ways in which this technology is fundamentally changing the world, frankly. And so every institution in the world, that is every university, every college in the world is scrambling to try and figure out what's happening and how they need to adjust their plans, and not just for
We're
teachers,
hoping
but also for
librarians
their
will take a
students.
leadership role in this.
What's that?
We're hoping that our profession will take a leadership role in this and helping universities.
I think it has to, and I think it's right in the wheelhouse of information sciences to, we're the information people. We understand things like metadata and description and cataloging and classification. These are things. It may not feel like we're experts in AI, but everybody is catching up at the moment, and so. My advice to students at this point is to get these skills any way you can, because um, and you need to be informed about them, both the good things and the bad things. I'm definitely not a cyber utopianist who's going to tell you AI and machine learning are the best things. There's a lot of bad things that come with this, but the unfortunate reality is that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube on this one. And so we're going to have to figure out how to use these things for good, and also how to be skeptical of them when they do things that aren't in our best interests. And the best way we can do that is by learning about them and being knowledgeable about them, knowing what questions to ask, and also using them for our own good, right? And so it's not a good idea to stick your head in the sand on this one and just pretend like, well, AI is just big tech companies and they're all bad guys. That's that's
But you're going to give us a different side of this. You're going to show us
yeah.
an example of a real powerful way for us to use your platform, Constellate, to support research and to make it even more powerful.
Yeah, like I said, I think we need to learn about how these things work. And as a nonprofit, we need to figure out how to use this technology for social good and also for helping people, really is what this is about. And what information sciences is about is helping people get access to information and learn things so that they feel empowered to make the world better, right? So let's take a look. I've rambled enough. I'm going to share screen here and let's take a look at the platform.
Yeah, Nathan, while you're pulling that up too, I'll just add one thing I've thought about as I've got more into digital scholarship and particularly text analysis was ways I could have applied this when I was an MLIS student because we didn't have this type of learning when I was in my MLIS program. And so it's something that even going into non-librarian roles, like into a museum education could benefit so much from this to tell stories from all the content that they have there. And, they're always looking for ways for people to use in archives and museums the different content that they provide. And this is just a great way to be able to make connections that may be more difficult to make when we were just researching from the documents in a room for an hour or two. This can pull them all together much quicker and pull out those concepts. I even My focus when I was in MLAS was on comic book burnings, and one thing I've been trying to dive deeper into using Constellate is working on building a data set to go deeper into when the comic book burnings took place, which a lot of it is World War I and World War II. So getting a little bit more understanding of what brought that on. So I'm going back a little bit to my MLAS years and bringing it into here and going into a rabbit hole of learning a little bit more about what took place during that time. So it's been really interesting even to pull in my own research from when I was a student and see what more I could do with it now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I worked in public history, I guess probably about 10 years ago at this point, and some of these tools could have really helped me out, especially working with oral histories and being able to go from audio to text. If you've ever done that kind of work before, it's very laborious. It takes a lot of time. You're sitting at a desk with a kind of pedal that allows you to kind of hear the sequence over again and trying to type it out. And the technology to go from audio to text was just coming in about 10 years ago. And so we were using some of that as kind of like a first pass, but we still had to go back over and make sure that the material was high quality. There are other things that could have been useful, things like image recognition, being able to describe things and identify who's in a particular photo. And the experience of being in a museum, the practical on the boots, on the ground experience is frankly a feeling of being overwhelmed by the amount of stuff. Every institution has a lot of stuff, and you have to figure out how to describe it and make it findable and make it usable. And so these kind of tools can really help us uh, figure out what's in our stuff and figure out what's useful and how to and make it available for others to use. And so I don't think that it will ever get rid of that kind of role of going through stuff and discovering it, but it can certainly help us a great deal. At the end of the day, we need humans to be kind of looking over what machines are creating and assessing whether it's accurate and improving the quality of it. But it can lighten the workload, so to say. And so these new technologies are useful uh, in libraries, in museums, but also literally almost every form of work can benefit from some of this technology. So this is constellate.org. And so we can take a look at some of the things that you can do here. I'm going to go ahead and log in. You can create an account here by choosing register for free. This will allow you to get into the computational environment and run notebooks and other types of things. I'm going to drop in my password here and get logged in. And then I think we're just going to dip our toes into some of these tutorials. So under this tutorial section here, let me zoom in a little bit just to make this a little bigger. We have a variety of ways to learn these things. Like I said, we offer classes for doing all of these types of things, and so we have all sorts of events and institutes and things like that. But we also have all of these tutorials that you can discover on your own. And so we have no-code tutorials that are suitable, I think, for beginners learning about key concepts in text analysis. But then we also have code tutorials from like, I've never written any code before, and I just want to get started writing some basic Python, all the way into fairly advanced things that you can do with these materials. And so we're going to take a look at some of these no-code tutorials today. So we have a number of different topics here, which are things that you can do with text analysis. So you can create something called a concordance, where you're bringing together a bunch of references to a particular word or phrase from a large body of documents and then analyzing them. This co-location is figuring out basically words that are co-occurring near each other in a body of documents. Sentiment analysis is looking at text and trying to get a sense of whether the person writing the text feels positively or negatively. And that's closely related also to something called emotion analysis. So trying to figure out what are the emotions being expressed in text. And this is one of those areas, I should say, where I am quite amazed that that this technology exists because, yeah, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the idea that a computer could understand or identify emotions would seem pretty far-fetched. But this is the world we live in now. Computers can identify emotions and they can identify positive and negative sentiment in the text that we write. Um, Named entity recognition is basically going through a body of documents and finding all the named things that are inside of it. So it could be people, it could be organizations, it could be places, it could be a dollar amount or a time or a date or something like that. But named entity recognition allows the computer to go through and find all of the things that are named inside. Question answering, this is something that can use large language models to answer basic questions. So you can supply some text, or optionally, you can supply no text. If the model is trained on information that has this data, then it can help you answer questions, basic questions from that data. There's also significant terms analysis. So this is just going through documents and trying to figure out what are the significant terms in that document. What are the things that this document is likely to be about? And this is some of the fundamental technology behind things like search. So whether it's your library catalog search or search on the web, significant terms analysis is there, and it's one of the fundamental technologies that we think of in the information science world. It didn't always used to be that way. And as an old timer, I definitely remember going into the card catalog and finding things that way, as opposed to getting a list of results, which is something I think we all take for granted at this point, is just how you search for things. You search, whether it's on, the library catalog or on Google, you search and a list of results comes up. And that fundamental way of searching is made possible by things like significant terms analysis. Um, and then the last example we have here from our no-code perspective is summarization. So taking a document and summarizing it, which is pretty wild to think about. But that is another thing that's helpful when you're doing research tasks, is figuring out what's inside of a book. We've all had the experience of buying a book, getting it home, getting so excited, reading it, and then realizing it wasn't what you thought it was. And what's inside is not something you actually want to read. I think we all have a few of those books on our bookshelves. And so the possibility to have computers summarize text for us and tell us what they're about is very exciting kind of superpower to have in our back pocket. Um, so maybe let's have Amy and Joyce decide, actually. We can do any of these. Which one would you like to take a look at? We have 7 options here: concordance, collocation, sentiment analysis, named entity recognition, question answering, significant terms analysis, and summarization.
Amy, I'm going to let you choose. We no, the thing is, we cover a lot of this, and I'm excited about them all. Concordance is similar to what we can do in our databases. Could you maybe mention just what keyword and context means, Nathan?
Sure. So keywords in context is a particular kind of visualization around concordance. And so basically what this visualization looks like is, let's say we search 100 documents, and it turns out that 15 of these documents mention a particular term or particular phrase that we're looking for. And so the keywords in context is going to create a visualization that has a column in the center where that particular word or phrase is at. And then it's going to give us a little bit of a context window on each side showing the occurrences. Let's pop in here since you've mentioned it, and we can see an example of what this looks like. So in this example here, we can see what an example of a keywords in context. So the keyword here is the word effect. And so this is what a quick or keywords in context visualization looks like. The keyword or phrase is down the center here. In this case, it is the word effect in blue text. And then we get that context window on either side. And we can, depending on the tool, you can make that context bigger or smaller so that you can get a sense of what each context is. And so this is an example of combining what we might call close and distant reading. Distant reading is when we take a whole bunch of text, like thousands or millions of texts, and so they're kind of at a distance because we can't get that close to a million texts. And so distant reading is bringing them all in and analyzing those millions of texts. And then the close reading part comes in when we actually get the context and we can go to each of those contexts and then we can read them closely to see how the word effect is being used in all of these different documents, right? And so that's the combination between distant reading text at scales of millions and close reading things closely, one line at a time, to kind of get a sense of how it's being used locally and comparing the different examples. So that is essentially what happens in concordance. There's a little bit
I
more.
was curious though, you say that it will work with phrases as well, and some of the tools we have been using only work with single words and don't recognize phrasing unless you come up with a tilde or something to kind of pull them together. Are you inputting a phrase so that it's keeping it discrete, like as a phrase, or is it identifying these things? And does it come up with synonyms in this particular
In this
like
particular example, it's not coming up with synonyms, but it will identify a phrase, I believe. And so, um, again, I should clarify with all of these no code examples, these aren't intended to be like research tools for doing serious research. They're really intended to demonstrate what a keyword in context is, what a concordance is, and you can play around with them. There's opportunities in here where you can input your own text. Sometimes you can look at examples from different disciplines. So we have examples here from the humanities. So that would be things like English and history and the arts and things like that. We have examples from the social sciences, which are kind of in the middle, I would say, between the humanities and natural sciences. They're a little bit more mathematically oriented. And then also the natural sciences as well. So this is areas like biology and chemistry and so on, physics. And so depending on what your background is and what your interests are, you may check out these different kind of research examples. And then there's also an opportunity at the bottom of this application or lesson to paste in your own text and to search for a particular keyword or phrase and have it give you examples of that. Again, this isn't intended like for a research task. I would say if you want to do like a serious research task, which then that's the time to start learning some code and get into our notebooks that really guide you through the process. Allow you, even if you're not a programming expert, you can often look at the code and say, oh, I just need to change this particular word here, or I need to change this number, or something like that. But with our courses, we really try to help people learn the details of doing these things, both on the code side and also on the text analysis side. But it's a lot to learn, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of higher education institutions haven't quite cracked this nut yet because it requires a fundamentally new kind of literacy, a kind of data literacy, a kind of AI and machine learning literacy that we've never seen before in the same kind of ways. I mean, this is very much in the wheelhouse, I think, of the information sciences, but it's going in a new direction. And I really feel that understanding things like Python and R are kind of the keys to this new kind of literacy because these are the languages where this kind of work is happening. Might not always be that way. In 10 years, there may be a new language where this work is happening. But for right now, Python and R are the places and the things I would say to learn if you want to be on the cutting edge, if you want to have the most um, marketable skills, whether in the information sciences world or any number of other places. Any large organization can find a way to use you if you have these kind of data and text analysis skills. And so you can play around with this and input something in here. And so think I have an example here from Project Gutenberg, which is No, I just link Project Gutenberg. Sometimes I'll grab a novel or a book or something, and I'll drop something in here. So
You don't need to include to upload Project Gutenberg. You're sharing a link to Project Gutenberg.
uh, yeah, there is a link in this lesson to Project Gutenberg, and you can choose whatever text. I mean, you can paste any text in here.
That's a huge corpus. It's all the
Oh yeah,
books. Yeah.
yeah. I'm just grabbing Frankenstein.
Okay.
And so what I'm doing then is I'm just going to put in the word monster.
Mhm.
Uh, and I didn't clean up this text at all. I probably should have cleaned it up a little bit, but we'll get a visualization here of a concordance. And so here we can see a preview of a concordance. There are 30 total concordances in here, or 30 total kind of examples, and it's displaying the first 10. And so we can see here in this kind of keywords and context visualization where the word monster is used inside of here. Now, if you're a serious literary scholar, you might want a little bit bigger context window. And so that would be a good opportunity then to jump into the lab and do this analysis there where you can get all 30 of the examples and then also expand that context window. You can do other types of visualization, etc. And so we have a link here to view the code notebook that looks at concordance and I believe also collocation in one lesson. And then finally, of course, we have references to the different studies from humanities and social sciences and science, natural sciences. So you have to have references. That's important. We all understand that. And so this is just one example of these no-code applications. I can also show you the lab environment. So let's take a look at that real quick. So we have those various no-code tutorials, and we're still expanding those. I'm hoping to get to 10 of those by the end of the year. We're at 7 now. And then right now I'm loading up a Python environment where we can do kind of more advanced forms of text analysis. Um, and so you might ask, while this is loading up, you might ask, what are things that we can do with, say, language models and things like that? And so I'm going to jump over to a place called Hugging Face. And in Hugging Face, there are all kinds of models. And so you might be familiar with some of the big tech organizations that have models, and you might think, oh, there's just like 5 of these things. But on Hugging Face, there are actually 830,000 different models for doing all sorts of different types of research tasks. And so there's a much wider world than kind of the big tech models that's being used for research and doing these things. And what types of things can they do? They can do things like take an image and turn it into text or a description of that image. They can take text and they can turn it into an image back and forth. You can take audio and turn it into text. You can take text and turn it into audio. So you can do back and forth. You can do things like image classification. You're going to an image and you're saying, hey, what's in this image? You can do things like image segmentation, take apart different parts of the image and label what they all are. And so there's all sorts of things in the computer vision realm. Optical character recognition is something that's very familiar to folks in information science. That's essentially looking at a picture of a document and then turning it into machine readable text. We can do things like text classification. And so I'll give you an example of a project that I worked on at UNC Chapel Hill. We were basically looking at laws that were passed in the state of North Carolina from the 1860s to the 1960s. So from the end of the Civil War through the Civil Rights Movement. And we were trying to find essentially what are known as Jim Crow laws, racist laws that were passed through the Congressional Assembly in the state of North Carolina. And there was a pioneering civil rights activist in the 1950s who started some of this work. She wrote a book. Her name is Polly Murray, if you haven't heard of her. She wrote a book called States' Laws on Race and Color. And it was called The Bible of the Civil Rights Movement by Thurgood Marshall. And so this book was extremely important to the civil rights movement. But we knew that Polly Murray hadn't identified all the Jim Crow laws that were passed. And so we created a project where we had all of the text from all the laws that were passed in over a century. And then we analyzed them. We essentially trained a model to identify racist laws, which sounds pretty wild. And this is before ChatGPT existed. It sounded pretty wild even back then. But we trained a model to discover racist laws. And so it went through and it found thousands of these laws. And then we would take these laws and we bring them to our subject matter experts, people working in Black history. And they went through and were able to identify which and basically confirm when the models identified laws that we hadn't seen before that were racist laws. So that's text classification.
It's
Um,
really powerful. And this is all open source, isn't it? In Hugging Face? This is
um,
community or no?
well, it's a little bit complicated, so that's a good question. And it's also, I think, a complicated question to ask what it means for a model to be open source,
Hmm. Yeah,
because
interesting.
we can say that a model and its weights are open source, which means it's available for us to use and to modify and to fine tune. But we may not have all the information on its training data and so on. And so it really depends on who's releasing the model. Hugging Face has models. You can see here's a model from Meta, which is the parent organization of Facebook. And actually, Meta is one of the more open. The other Google and OpenAI do not make anything open. They don't give us the model weights. They don't tell us what they've tuned on or any of their kind of training data or anything like that. So Meta gives us access to the model weights, but we don't necessarily know all the information about what it was trained on, and et cetera. And so for any one of these models, there's going to be a license associated with
I
it.
see.
And so sometimes they are like super copy left CC BY
Yeah.
and 4.0. Some of them use MIT licenses or more like computer sciencey type licenses. But that's something you have to look at on a model by model basis. And each one of these models will have a different model card that's associated with it. And one of the ways to tell if a model is good is usually it has a pretty good model card. Because if they don't describe what it is, then usually a lot of people don't use it.
Yeah.
And
The
so high
developers don't
quality
care enough
models.
to share
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah. So
go
Nathan,
ahead.
I want to make sure that we get in just a couple more things because we're running a little low on time.
Yeah.
But just in terms of practical things, when I was watching some of the key concepts videos, I saw that similar to your experience with looking across Frankenstein, you went into Othello to find references to race, which I thought was really interesting, and also because it's hard. It was probably mentioned using a variety of different words relating to the Moor, and you'd have to, and that is a very interesting thing for scholars to be able to do when they're researching literature. I also saw your colleague look at sentiment analysis using tweets. And that's something that a number of the researchers at Rutgers are looking at, emotion analysis or sentiment analysis in social media. It's going to be a kind of very interesting in our 2024 election. Um, and being able to visualize these things, I think, is really important. I was giving the example of a high school topic that my students did in terms of analyzing the language in inaugural addresses. You could pick any century or decade and look at themes that are that come out of that kind of textual analysis and perhaps even a sentiment analysis. But there's so much that we can look at if we kind of consider the problem and the type of tool we need to address the problem. And where you're showing us a number of tools that have, like just in your Japan language example, that have addressed problems that we didn't have tools for before. So our awareness of this is going to impact our ability to guide scholars, other librarians, and researchers. But we do have to speak up and say, I have an idea for attacking this problem. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of these technologies are built to address issues in the commercial world. And so like we also need to build the tools that we need in our community to help to address the problems that and thankfully a lot of the problems are information problems.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these tools can be easily repurposed, but sometimes we do need to be a little bit we need to develop and build new things and be creative about the technologies that exist and how we can use them to solve significant problems that our field is facing. So let me take a moment actually just to show you our computational environment. This is based on, or at least one of them. This one is based on Jupyter Lab, which is a Python environment. And so it allows you to bring in any materials you're interested in analyzing. So you can bring in data freely from your local machine, or you can download it from another place on the internet. And also you can take any materials out of this environment after you've kind of developed things. So um, these are all of our different notebooks for teaching and learning different skills in text analysis. And so here we can see the concordance and collocation notebook. We can also see applying large language models. We've got three different notebooks inside of here. We're working with models from Hugging Face and other sources as well. And
Oh, I
so
see. I
this,
see you're using retrieval augmented generation.
that's right. Are you familiar with this?
I am learning a lot about it and its ability to combine data sets beyond the large language models with the facility or the affordances of conversation around documents and content. But I don't have a deep understanding.
That's fine. Retrieval augmented generation is actually a fairly new area. It's only really been, people have been working in it just for a few years here. And so, retrieval augmented generation is basically a way to make sure that language models have the right information to be able to answer questions. And so, historically, what we used to have to do is we would have to train a new model from scratch and give it the new data. But anytime a large language model is trained, it's already out of date, frankly, because it takes so long to gather all of the data that by the time the model actually gets released, it could be 6 months, 12 months out of date based on the information it was trained on. And so, what retrieval augmented generation allows us to do is to give the model the right context for answering questions. And so, we can create something called a knowledge base. And the knowledge base can be a body of documents in a particular area. It could be a fairly niche area. Maybe you're really interested in studying some really small area. Maybe you're interested in studying the fungus of South America in the Amazon rainforest. And so that might not be something that ChatGPT knows a lot about. But if you gather together a body of research articles and documents, you can put that in your knowledge base. And so then when you have a question that you want to ask, that information can be put into a vector database. You can create a query, and then it will go through those documents and find the chunk that it believes answers your question that you have. And then when you query the large language model, instead of training the whole model from scratch, we just pass in the kind of chunk or the piece of information from the vector database that we believe contains the answer. And so that way, it's provided as context to the model. The model can read the context and attempt to answer the question. And so it's a way of making sure that models have the information they need to answer a question, whether that it's because the question is very current, has to do with current events, or maybe it has to do with specialized knowledge in a particular area. So this is very popular now with people in working in any kind of business where they have shared documentation and information about things, because you can take all of your documentation, all of your organizational documents, and put them in the knowledge base. And then you can write a query and just say, hey, how is this email supposed to be crafted? Or what's the process that I'm supposed to do in this circumstance? Or what is our HR policy? Like, whatever it is you want to query, you could ask, and it will go into the knowledge base, attempt to answer it based on the document. And what's nice about this RAG system is you might say, oh, well, I'm a little bit scared to have a model answer this because what if it hallucinates? We know this is an issue with generative AI. But one of the things you can do is Since it knows the document and it knows the section or chunk that it's getting the information from, it can reference and say, oh, well, I looked in this document and I looked in this area of the document, and this is where I got my answer from. And then the human can go in. If it's something very important, like how much parental leave do I get? You're going to want to double check that one. And if it's, something that's not as important, you may trust the model. But there are levels of trust I think we have to have with these kind of models. And the more sensitive the data is, the more sensitive the task is, the more skeptical we should be when they give us answers, especially in the form of generative AI. And so that's something that we should be considering with these things when we use them.
When we use systems using RAG, um, we're also looking at stuff potentially in the case of the business that is behind a firewall, or in the case of research inside a paywall. So with Constellate, if I'm bringing stuff in for analysis, I know I think I have access to all of the JSTOR content.
Mhm.
But am I allowed to bring in stuff that's behind a paywall, and who will be able to see it, or my own documents that may have some level of privacy attached to them? Am I working in a place that's guaranteed private and safe?
Yeah, so we don't look at anybody's data. You can bring information into the environment. You can also, if you're really concerned about personally identifiable information or other things that may be confidential, you can also take our notebooks out of the environment and download them and run them locally on your
Okay.
own machine if you have Jupyter Lab installed locally. And so when people are building these RAG systems, sometimes they do have sensitive information, and people do run them locally. In the case of Constellate and our work environment, we don't gather any of that data. I can't speak for other providers that are out there, but we don't gather all that data or do anything with it. Your stuff is your stuff that you bring into the environment. When it comes to issues like copyright law or rights restriction in terms of reusing materials for these kind of things, I think this is still something that the courts are working their way through. I mean, this is something that's at the heart of the OpenAI and New York Times case is
Right.
can you train a model on materials and not break copyright law? I think that's true, but I'm not a lawyer, and the lawyers are going to figure it out. My sense of it is that, particularly when it comes to things like a generative AI, this is a type of transformative use. But but we're gonna find out as these things get hashed out in the courts, and also as new laws are written to deal with what these technologies are doing. And so there are also exceptions in copyright law for research as well. And so I would never tell people like I would never give legal advice to anyone. But my sense is that at least at the current time, that you're pretty safe if you're doing this kind of work for research purposes. You're not creating a commercial product. You're not trying to resell people's work. You're not creating something that allows people's work to be easily reprinted or recopied. That's really what copyright law is about making copies of things. One of the ways that we get around this at Constellate, and maybe around isn't the right term. One of the ways we make sure we follow the law is when we share materials and create data sets for people based on things like JSTOR and Portico, we uh, don't by default share the full text of documents because that would break copyright law. And so the way that we can still allow people to research these materials is through something called non-consumptive use. And we supply word counts or n-grams. And so we will share something like 1-word, 2-word, and 3-word constructions that you can do quite a lot of analysis with. And so that way it's not a document that you can read, just like you're not getting access to the full text of the document. And so we're making sure that we're respecting copyright law. Now, for some researchers, they may say, well, I'm doing a technique that requires full text for the analysis, And we have ways of writing up legal contracts and things like that to help up researchers that need full text. But usually, most folks are happy with kind of access to the word counts. That is, sometimes they're called n-grams. So 1 word, 2 word, and 3 word constructions for doing analysis for research. So
One of the things we look at is Google's Ngram Viewer in terms of one of the tools that we can recommend to people for research. But okay, so we have talked for a very long time. I am truly excited, and I can't wait for my students to try this and potentially get in touch with you guys if they are more interested in learning more. But what are you most excited about relating to Constellate, or what advice do you have for my students as we kind of wrap up?
My advice is to learn some of these skills. I think they're going to be a fundamental kind of literacy in the 21st century. I think that being able to use AI, everybody's going to be able to use ChatGPT, and they'll be accessing and using AI in some factors. It's already happening in your life. You don't know it yet, but there's AI and machine learning behind things that are happening in your life, whether you realize it or not. And so having facility with these kind of tools, having a language like R or Python is really going to make you a valuable commodity in the job market. And like I said, that's not just an information science. Yes, tons of universities will want to hire you if you have these skills, but also outside of other kinds of nonprofits, there's a lot of good things you can do in the world, both inside of the university and inside of libraries, but also it's a big world out there. There's a lot of opportunities if you have these kind of skills to work in whatever kind of field you dream of. And so my advice is to learn some of these skills and also to find a community of people locally to you or online that can help you learn that. Constellate is part of doing that, helping people find a community of practice and learning. But there are many communities out there, and so my advice is learn some of these skills, build your literacy in this area because um, uh, the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. These are things that we're going to need to understand to be productive in the 21st century.
Thanks, Nathan. Amy, any final words for my students or about the Constellate platform?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. And Nathan's emphasized it too. Things are changing every week and it's just constantly growing. So don't overwhelm yourself with trying to be an expert in all of the things in digital scholarship. Text analysis falls in that, AI falls in that, podcasting, oral histories, video creation, mapping. It's all in this umbrella that's tied together. So I consider myself more of a generalist where I can pretty much dabble in many of the different things, but I don't think I'm an expert in anything particular, and it's okay to say you don't know something. It's one thing when I used to work with faculty in particular, and we'd go into classrooms and teach one of these kinds of tools. They had trouble saying I don't know in front of their students because you're supposed to be the expert in the room, and not knowing something, does that make you no longer the expert? That imposter syndrome we get. So it's okay to not know something, work through something together with a group, or go to a workshop and work through it. Or if you're teaching something, do it together with the people that you're teaching the information to. It's okay to say I don't know, or just be a generalist across the areas. It's fun being a generalist across the areas. Actually, I enjoy it. I like to go into rabbit holes and learn new things all the time. So
Right.
I
And
can be pulled everywhere.
everything's everything's evolving. So in so many ways, we're always co-learning with the
Hmm.
people who are in our communities, and that's exciting and it's honest. So yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, and it's certainly an update for my students right now. So I'm so grateful for your time. And are you okay if I leave some contact information with them near the video?
Sure,
Hmm.
absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.